Welcome to our latest breakfast briefing. Sorry, we're not in the office with our croissants and tea, etc. We'll get back to that relatively soon, but today we're doing it on a webinar, and we've got 7 people on the panel, which might seem a lot when you think about it, but it's not for what we're doing today and what we're trying to do. We wanted a senior panel for you from our employment team and experienced, and we've brought today Jesper Christensen, who's our head of employment, Nick Lariche, who's a partner in employment, Tim Hayes is a partner in employment but running our immigration team, Ian Wasserman, who's a legal director in employment, Claire Wagstaff, who's a legal director who runs our Southampton office, and Laura Biney, who's a senior associate in our Reading office. And then there's me, Brian Gegg, who some of you know. I'm a partner in our employment team, and I run what we call business advisory, which is a wider team looking after business needs throughout the country. So what are we doing today? Well, we're kicking off something that we'd like to bring to you as our clients, which we're calling Pathfinder. And this is a program that we'd like to start now in HR terms, and throughout the rest of the year expand on all the issues that we're going to pick up today for you. The point is that we see here is that all businesses need to look pretty closely at themselves now, just right now, and analyze and do an analysis of the business. And it's then with a view to seeing and setting yourself a path to move through out of the other side of COVID. And I think there's a couple of things that are important here. It's important to realize that all businesses do need to do this now, and also that this isn't a one-size-fits-all sort of situation. Your path will be different for each business, and we'd like to help you set that path as our clients. Now, there's a slide here. We haven't got a big slideshow today, but there's a slide of a pack of cards just about to come up. What's this all about? Well, this is important to realize when you're setting this path, that employees carry around cards with them. They usually turn the other way up, so you can't see what they are. Each one is an allegation, each one is a claim, and their deck is definitely getting bigger. There's no doubt about it. There's more cards in there, or at the very least, employees think there are more cards in there. And it's rather too late, I think, to react to these when they're played. So what we're saying to you is you need to anticipate those cards now, have a card of your own available to play back, and that's the best way to deal with these things. And it's relevant when you're setting this pathway. So what we're going to do, the panel are going to have a chat really through some points, some considerations which we think you need to think about as you do your analysis and as you set your path. So it's quite an informal chat. We'll flag some points. There's a Q&A button that you'll see on your screen. If you could use that anytime to ask a question, we will pick them up as we go through. There's a chat button as well, and that's if you've got an IT issue or something like that. So use the Q&A. They are anonymous, so only the panel can see the questions or who you are. So I think the best way is to start now to just kick off some of the points that we wanted to consider. So the first one is the concept of categorizing your staff. What have you got in your workforce, and what do you need? And I'm going to ask the panel to look at what they think is important about this area. So perhaps Ian, can we start with you?
Excellent. Thank you, Brian, and good morning, everyone. So I think what have you got and what do you need is actually a very good summary of this area. So workforce planning is a core business process which aligns changing organization needs and people strategy, and it can be the most effective activity that an organization can engage in. And I think it's absolutely right to say that as HR professionals, you should be at the absolute heart of that. It doesn't need to be complicated, and it can be adjusted to suit the size and maturity of any organization, but it does need to be front and center and a key organizational priority. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has absolutely created an urgent need for workforce planning in all organizations of all sizes. the sorts of things that you need to be looking at, what work actually needs to be done, by whom. Have you got the status of your workforce right on paper and in practice? So your use of employees, consultants, casual workers. I think that is a really important point. How can you future-proof your workforce? In particular, what skills do you need now and also going forward into the future? And I think these are all really fundamental issues for businesses, which as HR professionals, you are right at the heart of, particularly when considering a business path forward, which is absolutely crucial at the moment.
Yeah, and I think as Ian has said, setting this structure now, getting a business case together for what it is you need to put you in control, that's a vital thing, Ian, I think, isn't it?
Absolutely.
On that side. So number one, categorize what have you got, and then see what you need. So the next one, I think we looked at who these people are and what they do. The next point is probably more, where are they going to do it? Where do you want them to work, each individual person in your business? And this is all linked to the sort of hybrid working thing that's been going around, rightly or wrongly, in each business. So I think we need to look at, with the panel, what is important for employers to think about or to realise here. So Nick, how about you have a look at that for us?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's very much following on from what Ian was just talking about in terms of looking at, again, what you need in terms of the type of roles and where you think those are best to be done. Should they be completely in the office? Can they be done completely from home? Do you need a mixture of both? Does it depend on the type of role? Have you got, graduate staff who you think might be kind of better suited to being in the office because they need to be around people to pick up and develop the skills that they need going forward? So you're doing the analysis much the same way as Ian's just talked about in terms of, what do you need? And then put that forward in terms of the type of kind of hybrid working arrangement that you'll put in place for the future. Because, even at this stage with, the Prime Minister's announcements over the last week or so, there seems to be some uncertainty about whether employers should be encouraging staff back to the office or not. And you'll be looking at the type of kind of remote working policy, if you are going to have one, that actually fits with your type of business and the type of roles that you have. And it will be tailored. There's no need for it necessarily for kind of a one size fits all policy. It will very much depend on your own particular business. And as well as that, you need to think about how does that tie in with your kind of traditional flexible working requests. How do you deal with those? You may have a policy going forward that allows staff to have 2 or 3 days, say, working from home. But how do you deal with requests that go beyond that, for instance? Where will be the business case there? So I think there are a number of kind of different points you need to look at and consider. And I think it's a really interesting topic and one that will develop as we go on in the next few months.
Just from the sorry if I can interrupt, just to offer the international perspective. I guess we have been receiving an increasing number of queries about international remote working scenarios, and that might be something which a lot of employers are thinking about at the moment. Not just where are the employees doing it within the UK, but what are the implications if actually staff knowingly, in the case of the employer, are working, doing their work abroad? Are there sort of employment law and tax implications to that, and immigration implications both in the UK and in the country abroad where they're working, which need to be taken into account? So there's, I guess, an additional complicating factor there.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. Yeah, absolutely. I think the important thing is the employer's got to get in a situation of control here. Isn't that right? You dictate what you need and then take it from there. We helped a lot of clients 2 or 3 years ago for various reasons do this sort of exercise, stood them in very good stead. but they're going to have to do it again. Some of them are on the call, by the way. You have to do it again now because the world is different. So let's move on from that to there's probably two linked issues here, I think, which are really interesting. And this is around the concept of things you need to take into account on your journey here, but the importance of mindset, of how people are thinking. There's no doubt people are thinking differently, and as a result of COVID and lockdown. What does this mean to you? And we've also come up with the concept of the big resign, which sounds a bit, a bit fantastic, but we think it's real. So, Jesper, perhaps how do you see all these things being important to businesses?
Yeah, good morning all. I definitely think that the COVID in the last 15 months have made a lot of employees in particular businesses rethink their lives, and it has made them, Brian was talking about cards to play. Now, it has made a lot of employees at least imagine they have certain cards to play now, and by that I mean more and more employers approach me about employees claiming, they have a right to work from home, they have a right to live and work abroad, they have a right to all sorts of things. And of course, there's a lot of, I have, proven I could do it. We have been doing it for 12 months, so why can't we continue? So there's something there for employers to factor in when they do think about the sorts of things Nick and Ian have been talking about around flexibility, if you want to remain competitive, because although the employees aren't necessarily right at all, and there are other things to think about, if you are competing for talent, obviously you need to reflect on that mindset. The sort of flip side of that is, of course, also some employees have joined new businesses or joined new firms while in lockdown. We ourselves have a new team member in Laura. It's been an interesting experience, and we're getting to know each other partly in this sort of virtual way. But from employees' point of view, I think companies have to just remind themselves who has joined and how do you begin to rebuild the culture. And also employees who do actually want to come back to the office as soon as possible, particularly younger employees who often don't have the particularly great facilities to be operating from home. So there are lots of things to think about there in terms of what the employees expect. And the big resign is something I'm seeing in the work I do with senior executives in particular. And I've done a surprising number of settlement agreements for senior people, board level directors, people who have said, look, I'm in my 50s, my job was great, I used to travel, I used to do all sorts of things. Now I have to sit at home, and run a big company from my kitchen desk, and I simply want out. I've thought about my life, I don't want to do this anymore. And they approach the company, they approach their board and say, please, it's time for me to go. I want to have a complete change of life. And that is, again, something for businesses just to be mindful of the fact that there's definitely thought processes of this nature going on at senior level. And this can be a succession issue, a succession planning issue for businesses. It can be, there could be a downside to it because you need to plan ahead. But of course, there can also be an upside to it because you might want to think about, a change of the old guard at senior level. So this can be an opportunity, but a lot of people are, broadly speaking, they're just rethinking the way they view the world of work altogether, in my experience.
I think the big resign thing is right. I think the important thing, Jesper, presumably, is that businesses just factor it into account. You can only assume that somebody might do this and that you might have to react quite quickly. You just don't want to be taken by surprise by it.
That's right. But
it might be a card of the employer's own. There may be people out there that it's easier to make the succession movements now. You may be pushing at a slightly open door.
Yeah.
In that regard.
That's
but it's
right.
not being taken by surprise, I suppose, or not even thinking about that prospect is going to be difficult if you don't anticipate that it might happen.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a few questions coming in. I think the ones I've seen so far bear with us because I think we are picking these up a little bit later, but I'll keep a record of what we're coming in. So the next one we've got in our lineup is another, I think this is really interesting, is it's in some ways related. It's the impact on all this of fear. People who are afraid and need dealing with. So I'm looking to see how the panel see this, how they see it as an issue and what we might do about it. Laura, what do you think about that?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So yeah, the impact of fear, what do we mean? We imagine that businesses are going to start to hear comments from staff, might have already started to hear comments along the lines that they are afraid to return to work, afraid to use the workplace, possibly afraid to travel into work. And the concept of fear will probably, I think, relate to safety concerns in the main, so an increased chance of exposure to COVID. But I think for some, there might just be a more general fear where people are going to be worried about a change in their workplace, a change to their routine after such a significant period of time of not experiencing it. So I think employers will need to think of their chosen sort of pathway through that. And I think it's important for any approach to probably try to link to your business case as far as possible, so that you do have that to help you shape what sort of response you're going to be comfortable with, and that will vary depending on each organization. I think it's fair to say that some degree of nerves is understandable from people, at least to start with, and so not engaging with those concerns is unlikely to be productive. But what's probably more important is, going forward, how you actually have the conversations, quite tricky conversations possibly, about fear, how you convey business expectations and actually have that sort of dialogue so that you do try to reach some sort of resolution if possible. But it's possible to be navigating these conversations. It's just important to think about making sure you have them and do it sensitively, I think.
Yeah, because there are employers out there, and as we said earlier, that there's no one size fits all here. Different businesses have different extremes that they need to deal with, but you can certainly see some employers saying that's all nonsense. Boris has told us it's all fine. You must come in, otherwise you're going to be sacked. Fine, it depends how you run your business, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're entitled in some ways to do that, but
yeah,
I think
there's ways to sort of support that, in the sense of, obviously, the government guidance is going to be changing, and you have got vast numbers of the population who have now been vaccinated at least once. So there's certainly aspects that you can be drawing on to support it, but it does at least require thinking about.
Yeah.
I think communication is so key here, especially if you're speaking to people who are worried about the current situation. Expecting them to kind of understand what you're proposing straight away is, maybe a bit unrealistic. It may be just a matter of talking to them, reiterating the message over it, and again picking up on their concerns and dealing with them, because just ignoring them, or again just expecting them to understand your position immediately in this type of kind of worried state, just may not happen. So being clear about why you're doing what you're doing, going back to the business case, as kind of Laura mentioned, I think is going to be really critical here.
And that's why the business case is important, isn't it? We keep banging on about that, but it is very important because it enables you to then explain to people, why it is that you think, you're in a good situation to come in. And moving on to slightly separate issue, probably, Laura's for you again, because I know you have a special interest in these sort of areas. There's the fear, but there's the related impact of stress, isn't there? And mental health issues that you need to take into account. I mean, how do you see that affecting employers' decisions going forward?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's probably going to be on the rise for a variety of reasons, really. And I think studies are showing that people's mental health has generally got worse coming out of the last 16 months as opposed to going into it. And that's not going to be the case for everyone, but you know, there are going to be, for many, some quite serious feelings of isolation, loneliness, anxiety or depression coming out of the restrictions that they've been placed under. As Jesper mentioned, possibly more of an impact with younger staff as well, where they might have been, you know, working remotely from bedrooms or sharing a space with flatmates, and a whole variety of sort of factors that can contribute to that. In addition, you'll then have, I think, the post-COVID world concerns, where apparently around 4 in 10 are anxious about returning to the office, and so you have the, you know, those kind of aspects of for whatever reason, some people are going to be concerned, and some might have it based on a medical condition or caring responsibilities, but it's something to certainly bottom out. And as Nick mentioned, you know, that's one of the reasons why communication is key, so that you can actually understand exactly what the issue is. And then another one we thought about was the sort of potential mental health issue in relation to staff who've been furloughed. So either ones who've been furloughed in the past or might indeed still be furloughed, their feelings of possibly, you know, feeling inferior to those who haven't been furloughed. I think, you know, you can again see the sort of potential rise in mental health issues that employers will need to be alert to right now, and will need to manage.
And I think that's a real one, actually, Laura. I mean, I do like that concept for people to think about, just to think this might be an issue, you know, because lots of people have been doing different things and have been in some ways excluded from businesses, and now they might be coming back. How do they really feel about that? You know, important. Okay, let's move on to another issue. I don't think we'll have an answer really for this, but in the last few weeks, we've been hearing that what Boris is going to do, and we've heard about informed people are going to, you know, all bets are off. We're going to take informed decisions. I think last night was personal responsibility. We were just wondering, does this actually, who's doing the informing here? Does this actually place some extra duties on employers? And how do we think this is important? So Claire, what do you think about that?
Yeah, morning everyone. So as Brian said, over the last 18 months, we've had quite clear guidelines about working from home if you can, wearing masks and distancing, and that's all changing. And the shift is now moving to employers and individuals to take the personal responsibility. So where is that information going to come from is going to be quite key when you're looking at this map and how it feeds into all of these other areas. There probably still will be working safety guidelines, there may be sector guidance, there'll be results from risk assessments, consultation with employees. So there'll be a whole host of information coming in that needs to feed into these decisions. So it's adapting to that as well. And then from an employee's perspective, as we heard, communication is really important, and dialogue with employees. So they need to feel that they are informed as well. And the underlying duty of mutual trust and confidence will continue to exist, the health and safety obligation. So it will feel like there is a heightened duty really when it comes to making sure that everyone is informed as to what's going on and any changes that need to be made and adaptations as we come out of this process.
Yeah, thank you. And we've got, Claire, a couple of questions here. I don't think we can necessarily answer them all, but we've got, you know, if people are made not to wear face masks on public transport, you know, can they then insist that they avoid the rush hour, etc., things like that? I suppose they've all got to be taken into account here, depending on who's giving these decisions. And yeah. Another one, our employees seem to be asking for 100% employer safety. You know, that's real, isn't it? I think that's a,
yeah, and that
do have to shuffle these things around, because I think employers are expected at least to have considered these things and then to say, this is how we're going to do it.
And to be flexible.
That must be right, that we can get to that situation, but that's okay. There's a few little points we thought about. We've obviously been doing some thinking here, as you can see. We like thinking, but these are based around, I think, probably the concept of resilience as a business. It comes back to what you need and what work people are doing, but it's this building a resilient business for the future. We've mentioned future proofing a bit as well. There's a starting point here on and we've got a couple of these coming up now, but on digital inclusivity, which is quite an interesting concept. I don't know if anyone's looked at this. I'm going to ask myself about this. So what do you think about this, Brian? Well, actually, I think businesses and employees have learned a lot about IT during lockdown. Flexible working, I've got the right kit, have I got this, have I got that? And I think it's going to be critical, actually, as part of your pathway to match expectations for staff and for the future to keep changing the IT, because all age groups have a common interest in the right IT, and it's an engagement issue. It's quite a powerful bond for future resilience. So I think, understanding that the IT that you give people and match it to people is going to be very important going through. And as part of that overall looking at what businesses need and being resilient, there's this issue that keeps coming up, and all sorts of businesses have been talking about it in different ways, about the skills shortage. A lot of different businesses saying, I just can't get the staff now. And it seems to be coming from a number of areas. Tim, with all your hats on of immigration and employment, do you think, is this a real issue?
A skills shortage? Who would have known? Who would have known? Yeah, I think, there's obviously the dual kind of coronavirus Brexit effects at issue there. And I think it's been trailed quite extensively, hasn't it, in the media, that lots of different sectors in the UK economy are suffering from a lack of workforce to do the jobs that there are out there, particularly as we sort of come out of lockdown and the economy gets back to normal. And one particularly eye-catching thing, which I perhaps go on about too much, but I don't know if you saw in the news, the Wetherspoon's chief executive was sort of pushing for a more relaxed visa scheme for EU nationals, and it's obvious really that Brexit and the lack of EU workforce is really sort of putting a lot of employers under a lot of strain, and that might be because EU nationals have either returned home, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic, or they've been deterred by the fact that now those who aren't resident here and who weren't resident here before the end of last year now have to be sponsored into the UK. And obviously there's a cost element to that, both to the individual that wants to come here and the business that wants to sponsor them. It might be that either employers have to push up wages in order to sort of encourage homegrown resident labour to take up those jobs, or they would have to think about potentially getting a sponsor license if you don't already, and that additional cost of sponsoring someone into the UK. One sort of word of caution that I would say is that, we routinely help sponsors to get sponsor licenses in place, and because of the sort of big surge, I guess, in companies applying for sponsor licenses over the last couple of months, we've seen a very large increase in the waiting list for processing of those sponsor licenses. So what I would say is, it used to be the case that the Home Office didn't like speculative applications for sponsor license. You had to have a reason to apply for one. That's not the case anymore. So I would urge companies to apply early, really, to get in the queue for that sponsor license, even if you don't have a specific need now, but you suspect actually in the next few months you might have the need to sponsor someone into the UK from the EU or from elsewhere. Get in early and get that application prepared, because otherwise it could impact on you. If you have to wait months, which is the case at the moment for the Home Office to sort of go through that sponsor license application, then if it's a key person that you're wanting to employ, that could have a big impact on your business.
It is a real issue, isn't it? It depends what business you're in, depends what sector you're in. But so the similar theme, I suppose, and still as part of the resilience side, is whether it's important to have flexible workers, not where they work, but what they do, interchangeable, transferable skills to be able to adapt for the future, to be able to adapt maybe for more crisis management sort of things. People don't like planning for crisis management, but I think in this world you just have to. You have to assume that things can happen. So Jesper, maybe how important is this issue to employers thinking at this time?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the whole COVID crisis and the suddenness with which it hit businesses. I mean, personally, I think it's remarkable that things did continue to operate as smoothly as they did, no doubt, particularly because we had IT available. But there is a question here. If you are beginning to look at roles and upskilling your workforce to prepare, because we've seen what a sudden crisis can do, and there may well be other types of crises going forward, and we can't necessarily foresee how they will manifest themselves. But nevertheless, things that I think a number of employers are thinking about is to make jobs more flexible and potentially more sort of interchangeable, so that you have business critical skills and operational skills hidden in different pockets of the business. So if if one section were to become terribly ill with COVID, for example, there would be others who could continue to operate the business. And really, seems to me a question of not putting all your skills eggs in one particular basket, but also looking at responsibility and perhaps sort of make use of deputies and people who are actually trained to deputize, because we see lots of deputies appointed in name, but then it's all really forgotten about until someone does fall under a bus and they don't have the skills to pick up. So I think there are things there to really think about. That's the
training as well.
Yeah, and of course it's relevant to IT, particularly relevant around IT skills. People suddenly went home. Some people were probably better equipped sort of with their IT skills to cope than others, and others, including possibly myself and some in our team, we kind of had to learn very, very rapidly how to do stuff remotely. And just how to function.
I think there is a lot of forward thinking needing to be done now. And the thing about what you have now, does it fit? Does it fit where you're going to go? Has it been fitting for a while, but it's only been fitting because we're in this strange interim period? So
I think there's also a link here to the point about skills shortages, because one way to overcome that, of course, is to potentially avoid the need for labor, i.e. use artificial intelligence, IT, other ways of basically take the work out of work and make it more machine operated. And as you know, I'm very keen on this sort of thing. But for a long time before the pandemic hit, there was talk about the fact that lots of jobs would disappear and would be done either by machines or by computers and so on. And then that didn't really happen. But I think as you are rethinking your businesses now, particularly if you can't get the labor, then it's time to think about how can it be done without how can the business still run but without the labor?
Yeah, exactly. No one can replace you, Jesper, don't worry.
Well,
there's no machine.
We'll all be.
There isn't a machine good enough.
Keeping told we'll be replaced by AI soon. So.
The next one I think we've touched upon already, but just to emphasize what we're saying about the importance of communication and listening, I'd just like to go back to Laura on this quickly. I think we have dealt with it, but Laura, this is a vital thing just to factor in. You must get your comms and listening right.
That's right. I think the key message really is just that there isn't any good substitute for keeping up proper and genuine lines of communication with staff, and that means all staff, really, particularly at this time. A few sort of small points about what you should be communicating about, government announcements and guidance to keep staff up to date with those things, in conjunction with any policies that you've developed yourself as a business, such as hybrid working ones. Stress issues, as I mentioned earlier, together with sickness issues, the sort of tricky areas that do really benefit from that kind of open two-way dialogue to try to sort of move things forward rather than brushing things under the carpet. It doesn't provide any sort of resolution for anybody. Talk about well-being support that's available to staff, whether that's internally or externally. And ultimately, I think it just, it doesn't only show that you're being reasonable as an employer, it just also fosters positive employee relations and, increases staff engagement, all of the things that are going to be especially important.
Yeah, I think it helps with the card playing thing as well, doesn't it? People tend to keep their cards in the box if you talk to them.
Yeah,
it's the old sort of happy employees don't sue you sort of concept. So, but talking about cards, I think this next one's one I'm particularly really interested in myself. This is a real playing card issue. It's this concept that actually there are probably new types of discrimination in play in the marketplace now, coming straight out of COVID, and they're new or looked at in a new way. So Nick, I know you and I have talked about this a lot. What dangers do you see here for employers, or can some of these be ignored?
Yeah, Brian, I agree. I think it is going to be a really interesting consideration for employers moving forward in relation to how they deal with the potential discrimination challenges that come out of this kind of hybrid working pattern going forward. You're going to have potentially a mix of people working in the office and working from home, and how is that going to translate itself in terms of, are you going to find employees with caring responsibilities working from home more, and those without working in the office, or again are employees with disabilities going to be working from home? And what impact does working on home have on their careers? Now, pre-lockdown, the ONS did a survey and found that about half of those employees who typically worked from home were less likely to be promoted than other employees. Similarly, about 40% of employees working from home were less likely to receive a bonus than those who always worked at home. So if, for instance, you do find that actually, for instance, and this is just an assumption, it may not be right, but if, for instance, more women tended to work more flexibly, and that had an impact on promotion or bonuses, etc., then you've got potential sex discrimination claims coming out of that. Similarly, there could be disability discrimination claims if more disabled workers work from home. So I think there's going to be a real focus, I think, for employers to how do they manage this situation? How do they try to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and equally, regardless of whether they're working in the office or working remotely? Or again, this kind of comes back to what I was speaking about earlier. Do you say that actually some roles do have to be done in the office because that's the nature of the duties that they undertake? So I think there does have to be quite a careful consideration here, and we're going to have to, I think, learn to manage people in a new way. It's not going to be the same because we're all not going to be in the same place all the time, and that presents its own challenges that we're going to have to grapple with. So I think there is kind of considerable work to be done there. And then we've also got the potential discrimination coming out of COVID as a disease itself. Is long COVID, for instance, is a disability? Certainly you could see an argument that it does substantially affect employees' abilities to carry out their kind of everyday duties for a sustained period. And then you've got the maybe not quite so much kind of an obvious unlawful discrimination issue, but from an employee relations perspective, how do you counter claims that you're singling out employees who have been furloughed? I think that's going to be kind of a really interesting dynamic that we're going to grasp with. I can quite easily see people who are coming back from a long period of furlough thinking, well, actually, I've been really kind of set back here, and how are you going to manage their kind of reintegration into the business? So there are a lot of kind of different points here that I think we're going to be kind of working through for some time.
And there's the attitude thing, isn't there, Nick, as well? I mean, for years we've had presenteeism, which is if you're not in the office until midnight, there's something wrong with you, sort of concept. But that, you know, that's going to may well come back. And also, I think the equality thing. Do you think there's anything in this sort of concept that I've been reading about that the more flexible we get, the more you've got a situation where you're creating inequalities, you're creating more groups who could then say, I'm being treated differently to the other person.
Yeah, because you've got just different working patterns, and that, you know, it's different to everyone, you know, being in the office, you know, Monday to Friday, you know, 9 to 5. People are going to be working with different, you know, in different patterns, and, you know, and that a lot of the time can bring a lot of benefits. But again, it brings the ability of people being able to point out differences and claiming that they're being then treated differently because of them. So, you know, as I said, there are lots of kind of different points that people need to be looking at here.
We've lost Ian, I'm afraid. His internet's dropped out. So,
well, no,
Ian's back.
Back now.
There you go.
Just in time.
Just in time, because I was going to ask you this question, but we talked about discrimination.
Lots of people in my raid must have been logging on to the webinar.
This is the concept, and we're talking about different types of discrimination that might be off the wall, but of whistleblowing and as played as a card. I think we might have lost him again. Okay, I'll deal with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I mean, tribunal claims across the board. So, can you hear me?
I think we're losing you a bit, Ian. I'll just talk through it. I think we're losing you a little bit. So, to me, that this is really dangerous. This is a dangerous card of whistleblowing, i.e., the thing that you have done something wrong as an employer. This is my card. I'm playing you, and you're treating me badly because I'm raising that. When you do your analysis of what people have got and where they work and what they have exposure to, I think health and safety, people who work in health and safety, and people who are looking at health and safety issues, and also the furlough abuse. You know, you ended up not using furlough properly. But there are two areas where I think could be real cards for people to play, or to try and be awkward to play. And as we're coming back into the office or into the workplace, or, you know, saying you're not protecting me properly, and I've raised that with you, and now you're making me redundant, and that's all effectively discrimination. So you do need to factor those things in. And probably just to finish off pure discrimination, I think we covered some of these areas, but there are, of course, traditional areas of discrimination which seem to be enhanced a little bit in this situation these days. So, Claire, what do you think about those? Just so some of those areas quickly.
Yes, as you mentioned, there's the traditional factors of age, sex, race, disability, maternity, which are all coming out in different ways in the pandemic. We've got things like caring for children, older people who've got long-term COVID, homeschooling and how that affects working parents, what time meetings might be, changing things at short notice because suddenly there's a bubble that's gone off sick, and that's also going to be changing soon as well. We've got potential age discrimination risks with the different age groups getting vaccines at different points and who's coming back to the offices, shielding issues. People are now being advised not to mix with unvaccinated people. People having operations will need time off potentially, and how that's discussed with employers. So it's really a case of how an employer can be seen to be making adjustments and factoring these things in when it comes to policies and procedures to try and reduce the risks of these discrimination claims. And who knows what absence level is going to be doing when we come back to work. People haven't been exposed to other people, so that might trigger long-standing disabilities. So there's a whole host of traditional discrimination risks that employers need to be aware of and bear in mind as they map their path.
Yeah, and they are very real, and as Nick said earlier, and you said, you know, a lot of it comes out of COVID itself, doesn't it? We're not quite sure what is going to actually come out of that as an illness. The next one, I think, is a distinction we haven't talked about it. We've talked about it in previous webinars, but this is the difference, which I think is really important to bear in mind. Is there a real difference between a home worker and someone who works at home quite a lot? And is it something that you take account in with your mapping now? Yes, but how important is it to get that distinction right, do you think?
I think it is important because, and really comes back to what Nick said at the beginning of the seminar, in terms of working out who do you need to do what from where, and which roles are, and could you classify as truly home workers, as opposed to people who you need to be in the office some of the time and who may ask you for permission to work at home 1, 2, 3 days a week even. Because if you have home workers, obviously you have sort of particular health and safety responsibilities and duties. You need to make sure they have a safe workplace, and you need to make sure you've done a risk assessment and so on. A lot of that seems to have fallen by the wayside as part of the pandemic. But proper home working does come with certain special sort of responsibilities on the part of the employer, as opposed to sort of proper flexible working, which is, well, I suppose the one thing I would make, the one point I would make there is if they are simply flexible workers operating under your flexible working policy, you may not want to change the contract of employment specifically in the way you would do for home workers, because you would want to give yourself the flexibility to flex, or ask them to perhaps spend more time in the office, or permit them to spend less time in the office over time as things bed down. I think if there's also sort of things to do with travel costs and how you get to and from work, and taxation in terms of where your workplace is if you travel to other locations and so on. So it's important to have a designated workplace, a normal place of work in the contract, and it's one of the particulars you are meant to give in any event. And I just have a final thought, which I can't work out in my own mind, but this is where this will all take us in 2, 3, 4 years' time. And it's sort of linked to property, really, because I can't see employers hiring nice big offices so they can have a lot of people in, 200 people on a Tuesday and a Thursday, but otherwise allowing it to sit empty Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example. I think something, any sensible employer who is spending thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions on hiring office space will pretty much over time want to make sure that space is full. So I do think that whatever we think things might look like right now, I think it will all begin to look very differently if you extrapolate 2, 3 years down the line. So do just bear in mind that slightly longer term view. And also it will very much depend on what others do within your sector, industry sector. And when we look at this from a sort of a legal perspective, some law firms seem to say, we're going to get rid of the office. There will never be any needs for any of us to be in an office again. Whereas other businesses saying, no, we need to establish a proper culture. Actually, we want everyone back in the office. And we've seen IT companies go one way and then go the other way. So don't necessarily tie your workforce into a rigid contract where they have permission to ask for one thing important. Or the other.
Really important that. I'm a great believer in that. And there's some questions we got in on this line. A home worker is quite a substantial thing. It is quite the business needs you to work at home. We know you can work at home. We don't need you in the office or in the building, and you can do it. And then we're going to change your contract to make you a home worker. Everybody else is just flexible away from the norm, and the norm might be, ideally we want you in the office or business 5 days a week, but you can stay at home for a few bits, and that's vital, I think. And we've had a couple of interesting questions. Should you change your performance management situation, maybe to take into account that you're not being discriminated for how much you're in the office, but you're being looked at for what work you actually do, which I think is a good thing. And another one which has come in, which is a professional services practice. I think, you know, we're not having any home workers, but we've got flexibility for everybody. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, no. You know, but you must analyze your own business. What do you actually need? Why do you need people in the office who can work at home? And that's the vital thing. You can almost do anything you want here as long as you've analyzed it from your own business. So the next concept, and these start to roll in to one in some respect. The isolation thing, and I suppose it'll come into vaccination as well. But we've been asked a question about track and trace, for example. You know, if that continues, how do you deal with that if people insist? Because you could get a situation where at the moment you're track and traced, you've got to go home. You know you're not ill, but employers can't say, no, you must come in because I know you're not, I know you're okay. So this duty is to self-isolate. Tim, is there anything, can you make head or tail of what's actually going to happen after last night?
No, come in. Well, I think, I mean, I've had, as I'm sure
until August, isn't it? It's until August, the track and trace texts. And
yeah,
that sort of thing.
And I've had the app, you know, for ever since it was brought out, and I've never been pinged by it. Touch MDF, but I'm sure that just before I go on my holiday in a couple of weeks' time, I'll receive an alert. But yes, I mean, obviously, if you do, it's advisory, the app. So unlike if you're advised, if you're contacted directly by track and trace, then you are required to isolate.
It may go away. I mean, this issue may go away. The one we're thinking about.
But I mean, obviously the restrictions are coming away as of next week. But the requirement to self-isolate, even if you've had both vaccine doses, doesn't disappear until I think it's the 16th of August.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could have the potential for disruption because you could have, I guess, millions of people who are required to self-isolate as the economy opens and people start mixing more. And of course, if you're an employer with lots of people self-isolating, you're going to have to manage that. And there may be situations where people can do work from home. They're not ill and can do work from home. But you obviously can't insist on those workers coming.
It may go past mid-August, I think. Let's see. There's the vaccination thing as well. Probably, to what extent are you going to insist that staff are vaccinated or double vaccinated or proof of vaccination? Ian, I think you're back without your visual picture. Is that right? He's not back.
I am. I can try again. So apologies to all of you. So it's a really difficult one because there's no mandatory requirement for anyone to be vaccinated, and in turn, clearly employers can't enforce mandatory vaccination in the workplace. And I think employers have to be very careful then in terms of the policies that they are putting forward, that it's not construed as an attempt to introduce mandatory vaccination. Of course, that position may change, and in certain sectors, I think the government is proposing to make vaccinations mandatory. So, for example, in the care sector, where employees work with clinically vulnerable people, so that may well change. But that's not to say that the topic shouldn't and can't be raised by employers. Employers, I think, may well want to take an active role in trying to encourage staff to be vaccinated, and you might do that by sharing the benefits of being vaccinated, sharing latest health information, putting in place arrangements to allow employees to have paid time off, for example, to be vaccinated. But it does become tricky when you're thinking, for example, about the approach that you take for contractors who come into your business, for agency workers, visitors. What about people who aren't employees but are job applicants or new starters? So I think that there is still, although we are quite advanced, I think, within this country in terms of the vaccination program, there is still a lot of careful thought that employers are going to need to give to the question of vaccination in the workforce.
I think what the government do and say is one thing, isn't it? But we wait and see as that goes on day by day. But in the workplace, I think vaccination is a bit more difficult. Face masks is something that we can do. Employees might expect it. We had one question in, can we make people wear masks when they're dealing with vulnerable people? Well, the answer is yes. I mean, it's if your business needs these things to happen, or you think that is the best thing for your workforce to wear masks, then you are entitled to ask them to do it. Just move on to the next one. We've had a couple of questions along this line, but this is the growing issue really of wages against location. This has to be dealt with and looked at. Do you pay less for people working flexibly if they're not working in London anymore and they used to work in London, that sort of thing? Nick, what do you think about this? What do you think employers need to take into account here?
Yeah, this is a question that I've been asked quite a few times in the last kind of few months, and you can see it's obviously a hot topic from the questions that we've asked from today. But I think if you are having a request from someone who pre-pandemic was working kind of full-time in the office, and they've enjoyed working from home and possibly relocated elsewhere in the country to such an extent that now they want to work full-time from home, it would be open to you to think about whether there should be an adjustment in their salary because they're kind of now living outside of London, say. Because after all, the starting point is that the employee is making a request to change their contract. It's the employee who's asking to work from home permanently, whereas presumably their place of work was at your office. So you could make a condition on accepting that request to be some kind of adjustment to their salary to reflect a kind of a different location. That would be a matter of discussion between you and the individual. But I don't see as a matter of principle that should be a problem. The kind of the flip side to that as well is that you may be able to recruit staff from different areas of the country if you do allow greater flexible working and the ability to say work from home 3 days a week. It makes it easier for people to potentially commute from different areas of the country, so you immediately increase your catchment area. So yeah, I think there are kind of pros and cons, but there are kind of different points there for employers to think about on this issue. But
it can be done, can't it?
I think
again,
there is,
talking to people is important about these things, and
I think there is going to be a kind of there's going to be a discussion. Be interesting to see how employers adjust to this issue going forward. Whether they're going to think, well, we're going to offer flexible working, and that's going to be a good way of attracting the talent that we want, or are they going to think, well, because we're allowing flexible working, we can adjust people's salaries for new hires going forward. So it's all of these points
and
that have to be kind of weighed up.
And it's a case by case basis, but also you need to get your policies right, so you're not treating people differently. But we had a question about we get this all the time. London is a very difficult one. London waiting and that sort of thing. I mean,
it's exactly the point, really.
It's the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about whether you should, if you're not having people working in London any longer, if that's going to be full time from, I don't know, Cornwall, Scotland, for instance, whether that means that as part of that discussion, you're looking at their salary going forward.
We had I'm conscious we're running to the end of our build session, but we only got a couple more to go, and I hope we're picking up some of the questions as we go through. We had one which I think we'll just flip over about workplace safety. We've talked about this quite a lot. I mean, there is no doubt that employers have duties on health and safety, and they will continue, and they will get more marked whilst you're protecting staff on one hand and building flexibility on the other. There's a point which I think is very important to think. So we'll deal with it on. You're going to reorganise now, but you're going to reorganise without furlough being available to bail out some of these things. You need to be careful here. So Claire, it's just a couple of things that the audience can think about, or make sure they do.
Where furlough's been useful for employees that haven't necessarily had short-term working clauses or layoff clauses, furlough's coming to an end, so contracts may need to be looked at to see whether to add in those clauses going forward. But also, if people are reorganising their business, again, it's making sure that you've got a firm business plan, mapping it through, consultation with employees. Are redundancies going to be required? Who's in the selection pool? And if workers are doing more flexible skills, it may be that the pool isn't quite as easy to identify, and then looking at alternatives and perhaps the introduction of settlement agreements, when to introduce those, what to pay as well. So reorganisation is going to be quite key coming up going forward to make sure that your business fits for what you want it to do.
Yeah, and some of the old school stuff that could have been useful for people, layoff clauses and things like that, which nobody's got unless you're in manufacturing, really.
Yeah,
it might be worth trying to put at, but I wouldn't sign one. And I don't think a lot of our clients, their staff would sign these things. We've got the effect of change, which we've looked at before quite a lot in previous sessions. So I'm not going to continue to go into it. I mean, I was going to ask Tim about this because I know he's looked at some stuff on it, but it's basically getting consent, etc. Tim, isn't it? If you're going to do change, you need to actually do the process properly.
Consent and your business case. Business case, and then if that falls into place, you're halfway there.
And last week we were looking at our own knowledge management, because we have to manage our own knowledge in our team. The first case on this is a firm of solicitors that got it completely wrong, didn't they? They got the sort of consent process and all that sort of thing totally wrong. So, which is amusing on one way, but not very nice. And there were a couple of other issues, just final issues, that I was going to point out to you, just myself, to finish. And one is this expectation on employers. There is definitely a difference compared to when we went into lockdown, and judging that against coming out of lockdown now. When employers went in, they were thrown in, and they had no choice and they had to react. Now, I think it's definitely true that you've had time to think about it and more time to build a sustainable model. So I think more is expected of employers, and that's really important when we look at your pathway. And finally, there's a on the pathway issue and finding this way. I think it's important, obviously, to make it wider, because this is all internal looking. It'll be really important to look externally as well. So how are you interacting on your pathway with your suppliers and your funders and your clients and your debtors as part of the path? And we thought in the sessions that we're going to do for the next, the rest of the year, on expanding on some of these points that we've been looked at, and others, we'll bring some people from our other teams around the firm in, tax, reorganization, restructuring, commercial contracts, all those sort of things that you have to look at. So I don't know what people think. I think a lot of the questions that we've had, we've actually picked up as we've gone through. There's a few on fear. There's one about, I've got people abroad. This is interesting. I don't know the answer to this. We've got people abroad. We're going to have people in the UK working part-time, and they're now saying they're not ready to come back. What do I do with them? That's quite a tricky question, actually. Do you put them on holiday, work their holiday out? I don't know. There is a balancing act to be done there, but at its extent, people, if they've had enough notice of something that you really, really need in your business, and you need it to be done like that, then they will have to comply. It's a question about how much time you realistically would give them before you start saying, well, I don't think you're working now. You need to be working in the UK. If you can get back in, Tim.
Yeah, I guess if you're allowing people who happen to be abroad to work remotely and you're not doing that for UK nationals, I guess, yeah, there's a possibility of problems there. But I guess as things open up and travel opens up again, then it's going to be more possible for people to get back and less possible for them to insist on having to work from abroad. The reason for them doing that is going to fall away.
And we had one comment from someone I know would make this sort of comment, so thank you. Yeah, don't the cards seem too many, and aren't they all stacked up against employers? Well, possibly, but I think it is really important to anticipate what's in that pack of cards. It's not just an analogy, it's something to really do think about. So I think we've probably dealt with a lot of the questions. There's quite a complicated one again, someone working in France. Apologies, I'm not sure we can answer that right here. But so is there anything else the panel would like us to chip in on? Otherwise, I think we should let our guests go, even though we haven't given them croissants or tea to go on with this time. We will do it next time if you'd come to our office. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to finish on? I'm looking at them. Even Jesper's, we stunned Jesper into silence, which is great. I
think you've covered quite a lot this morning, Brian.
We covered quite a lot. Quite a lot, and it was designed for that. It was designed to touch them, to let you have a list of what we're thinking about, things you take into account, and then we will expand upon these. And in particular, please contact us and to say, look, you dealt with those two things. I'd really like a session which widens and expands on that, and that's and we will do that as part of this Pathfinder program. So I think all it's left to say is that thank you very much to our panel. Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you to Melissa in the background who makes all these things happen, and we will see you very soon and get some croissants on board in line for that. Okay, thank you very much.